It was a chilly October morning, and the pale light of dawn barely made its way through the dusty windows of their cramped apartment. Ben, a bright-eyed, inquisitive boy of 6, sat at the kitchen table, stirring his cereal absent-mindedly. Today felt different, and he knew why. His bottom front tooth had been wiggling for days, and he was sure it would finally come out. His little fingers kept poking at it, twisting it gently, feeling a strange mix of discomfort and excitement as he anticipated losing his first tooth. "Mom, I think it's almost out," he said, his voice wavering with both pride and nervousness. He opened his mouth wide, showing her the tooth that was hanging by a thread. His mom, Claire, glanced up from the sink, her face softening into a tired smile. "That's great, Ben. Just be careful not to pull it out too hard, okay?" She watched him for a moment, her heart heavy. She knew this was a big deal for him, but she also knew what came next. The tooth under the pillow, the hope of a gift from the tooth fairy. Money, however, was something they barely had enough of. All day Ben couldn't keep his mind off his tooth. He kept poking at it with his tongue, twisting it between his fingers, and imagining what it would be like to wake up to a shiny coin under his pillow. At school, he barely paid attention, his thoughts drifting to the tooth fairy and the stories he'd heard from his friends. They said she was magical, that she could sneak in and out without a sound, and that she always left something special. He hoped his tooth was special enough to earn him something cool, maybe even $1. Back at the apartment, Claire was preoccupied with her own worries. After picking Ben up from school, she spent the afternoon searching through drawers, rummaging in her purse, and even shaking out the cushions on the worn-out couch, desperately hoping to find enough change to make Ben's night magical. She made sure to do it when Ben wasn't around, not wanting him to see her struggle. She found a few coins, but it wasn't much. It never was. By dinner time, Ben was buzzing with excitement. "Mom, can I pull it out now?" he asked, his eyes wide and hopeful. Claire turned to him, trying to mask her exhaustion. "If it's ready to come out, sure, but don't rush it, honey." Ben's eyes lit up. He ran to the bathroom, stood in front of the mirror, and gave his tooth one final determined wiggle. With a tiny pop, it came free, resting in his palm like a small, precious gem. He grinned at his reflection, blood staining his gums and the tiny tooth gleaming in his hand. "I did it, Mom. It's out," he called, sprinting back to show her. Claire wiped her hands on a towel and knelt down to his level. "Good job, Ben. I'm so proud of you." She took the tooth from him, examining it carefully. It was small and white, a typical baby tooth, but for some reason it gave her an uneasy feeling. She brushed the thought aside and hugged him. "Now, let's put it somewhere safe, okay?" They found a small envelope, and Ben carefully placed the tooth inside. "Do you think the tooth fairy will come tonight?" he asked, his voice soft and filled with wonder. "Of course she will," Claire said, though her stomach knotted at the thought. She still needed to scrape together a bit more money to make sure Ben's night wasn't a disappointment. After dinner, Claire tucked Ben into bed. "Mom, can you leave the light on just a little bit?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why, honey? Are you scared?" "No, it's just, I don't know what the tooth fairy looks like." "What if she's scary?" Claire chuckled softly, trying to ease his fears. "She's not scary, Ben. She's kind, and she brings gifts for kids who are brave enough to lose their teeth. Don't worry, you'll be okay." He nodded, but his eyes flickered nervously toward the dark corners of the room. She kissed him on the forehead and left the door slightly open, letting a sliver of light from the hallway seep in. When he was finally asleep, Claire went back to searching the apartment. She checked the jar on top of the fridge where she kept loose change, sifting through it for anything that could add up to enough. After a few minutes, she managed to gather a small pile of coins, just enough to make a decent gift from the tooth fairy. She let out a sigh of relief. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to make him happy. She sat down on the couch, turning on the TV, hoping for some distraction from her worries. The apartment was silent, except for the faint hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the old building settling. Claire's eyes drifted to the clock. It was almost midnight. Time to play the part of the tooth fairy. As she stood up, the lights flickered, just for a moment. She froze, her heart beating faster. The apartment was old, and the wiring was likely ancient. She waited, but the flickering didn't happen again. Pushing aside the unsettling feeling, she tiptoed down the hallway to Ben's room. When she slowly opened the door, her breath caught in her throat. The room was dark, but she could see a shape, a shadow, looming over Ben's bed. It was tall, unnaturally tall, with long, spindly limbs that seemed to stretch toward the ceiling. Claire's first thought was that her eyes were deceiving her, that it was just a trick of the light. But then the shadow moved, slowly, deliberately, bending over her son. Ben was lying still, too still. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling, as if he were in a trance. Claire's heart pounded, fear tightening its grip around her. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The shadowy figure was hunched over Ben, its hands, or what seemed like hands, reaching for his mouth. Claire watched in horror as it pried his lips apart, revealing the small gap where his tooth had been. The figure reached inside, and to Claire's horror, she saw it pull out another tooth, slipping it into a small, dark bag it carried. "No!" she managed to scream, the word tearing from her throat. The figure turned its head, slowly, its face hidden in darkness. It tilted its head slightly, almost as if it were curious or amused by her outburst. And then it raised a long, bony finger to where its lips should have been and shushed her. The sound was like a whisper, a soft, chilling breeze that sent shivers down Claire's spine. She wanted to run, to grab Ben and pull him away, but her feet felt glued to the floor, her body frozen in fear. The figure reached down again, slipping another of Ben's teeth out and placing it carefully in its bag. Ben didn't move, didn't react. It was as if he couldn't feel what was happening to him. Claire's vision blurred with tears. "Please, stop," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The figure seemed to pause, as if considering her plea. Then it straightened up slowly, its shadow stretching across the room, impossibly tall. It turned toward the window, its movements smooth and graceful, almost as if it were gliding. And then, without a sound, it was gone, dissolving into the night. Claire rushed to Ben's side, shaking him, calling his name. "Ben, wake up, please, wake up!" He stirred, his eyes fluttering open, but he looked dazed, confused. He raised a hand to his mouth, feeling the empty spaces where his teeth had been, and started to cry. "Mom, it hurts," he whimpered, his voice small and frightened. Claire hugged him tightly, her own tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't know what she had just seen, didn't understand what had happened. But as she held her son close, she felt something cold and metallic under his pillow. She reached for it, pulling out a small, dark coin, tarnished and old, with a strange symbol etched into its surface. She stared at it, her hands trembling, as the light in the room flickered once more.